Hello, and welcome to Kindred Spirits Book Club, the podcast where two grown ladies geek out about Anne of Green Gables. I'm Reagan Duffy, and I'm here with my co-host, Kelly Gerner.
Hey there, Kindred Spirits.
Kindred Spirits, this is an episode theme that is near and dear to my heart. It was something that was top of mind, I think, for both of us as we were reading Rill of Ingleside in preparation for this season. So today, we are going to be talking about Anne and Gilbert Blythe as parents. We commented throughout our discussions of Anne of Ingleside and Rainbow Valley that we missed seeing more of Anne's journey to motherhood, more of her point of view as she was raising young children. And one of the things we love about Rill of Ingleside is watching Anne and Gilbert parent their now young adult children. So that's what we are going to be talking about today. But before we move into that topic, Kelly, it's the holiday season. Do you have any particular favorite holiday movies that you love? Let's start this episode on the lighter note.
Yeah. Right. Before things get terribly, terribly sad. Oh gosh, I certainly do have some holiday favorites. Our house, me and my husband, my house is a big Muppets house. So we watch many Muppet related holiday movies. My husband showed me Emmett Otter's Jug Band Christmas when we were dating. That's one that's from his childhood that I had sort of missed out on. And I was so charmed by it that now it is like essential holiday viewing for us as a couple. It is very slow and sweet and nostalgic. And I think it's one of those things where if you didn't grow up with it, it might be a little hard to love because we have showed it to other people who are like, that's boring. But it's incredibly beautiful. It's like an early Jim Henson movie where all of the puppets are like beautifully handmade. It's like a very kind of like quirky, wholesome sense of humor. So that's Emmett Otter's Jug Band Christmas, which is always a favorite of ours. And then of course we always watch The Muppet Christmas Carol, my absolute favorite Muppet movie. Michael Caine playing Scrooge, playing that role serious as a heart attack while there's just Muppet chaos around him, that will never not bring me deep holiday joy. So,
and you know, The Muppet Christmas Carol, I feel like has given birth to like the internet meme idea of more Muppet movies of classics where you've got a single human and then Muppet chaos. I think my favorite one is the idea of Pride and Prejudice Muppets. Yep. Where Darcy is the only human and everybody else are Muppets. I think that would be classic.
I've gotten deep into some like comments wars with people on which Muppets should be cast as which of the Bennett sisters. Like I take it very seriously. So okay. I know exactly what you're talking about.
I love it. Now, if you are into Muppet Christmas, did you also watch the Muppet Family Christmas, which is not a movie? It is apparently an hour TV episode it was like in 1987. This is my favorite Muppet Christmas, but it is hard to find.
I have absolutely watched that. I know what you're talking about, but that's a childhood memory for me. I don't think I've watched it in adulthood.
Yeah, I think you can find like some things on YouTube, but the quality is terrible because it's like recorded off TV or whatever. But that, if listeners, if you can find it, it's like the Muppets, the Sesame Street characters, and Fraggle Rock all get stranded in a big house on Christmas Eve in a snowstorm. And it is exactly as bananas and crazy as it could possibly be. And I think Miss Piggy is trying to get there to have Christmas with Kermit, and she's stuck in the snowstorm. And the Swedish chef meets Cookie Monster, I think.
Amazing.
Like, everything you could have possibly wanted in Muppet zaniness. I'm going to have to track that down again.
Yeah, if you do, I think we need to watch it because that's stirring up childhood memories. I'm going to have to find that one for sure.
Well, if we're thinking about like making movies into Muppet movies, one of my favorite Christmas movies that I discovered as an adult, even though it's a classic, it never was as big as like Miracle on 34th Street. One of my favorites, of course, is Christmas in Connecticut.
Oh, yeah.
Because that's a classic 40s screwball comedy. And if you've never seen it, listeners, it's great. Barbara Stanwyck plays a young city writer. She writes for a magazine, and she writes in the persona of basically like the 40s equivalent of Martha Stewart. She's a farm wife with her baby, and she makes huge meals from the food that they raise and grow on their farm. And she paints these idyllic pictures of her Connecticut farm, and she's a big hit until somehow a soldier returning from war and the magazine's owner, neither of whom know the truth about this, invite themselves to Christmas at her farm in Connecticut, which she doesn't have. It's this whole big, screwball thing where like she's kind of borrowing this farm and she's pretending to be married, and there's all of these people swapping in babies that she could pretend are her babies, all while she's falling in love with the soldier, but she doesn't want to get fired. She can't cook at all. It's so funny, and it would make a great Muppet movie.
That would make a great Muppet movie. Okay, but I can't believe that we missed this opportunity. If we were casting Anne of Green Gables as a Muppet movie where everyone is a Muppet, but there's one human, which of those characters is our one human?
Oh, gosh.
Is it Marilla? It might have to be Marilla.
Part of me, that was my first instinct, right? Because she's your dead serious point of view character who's just bewildered, exasperated, and just eventually gives in to the Muppet shenanigans. Okay.
It could be Matthew.
No, Matthew doesn't have enough lines. He's too quiet. Janice as Diana Barry.
Oh, I like that casting. I like that
Miss
casting.
Piggy is Mrs. Lind. She's not going to like that role. That's not enough of a diva role for her. She's going to want to be Anne.
Miss Piggy is obviously Mrs. Lind. That is a match made in heaven. Okay,
listeners,
what do you think about Anne as Scooter?
That was my thought, because you want Ernest, right?
Yes.
We give Scooter some red
and
braid.
red hair.
I
think that's perfect. Anne as Scooter.
Okay, this is out of the box casting. Okay, so Matthew, I've got two ideas. Okay. One, you could do Rolf the dog.
That was my initial thought too. Rolf, yeah.
Or
because he's got the heart.
Yes, right, exactly. He's wise in his own way.
Yep.
Or we go full chaos and we make Animal Matthew. Puff sleeves!
Oh my God, that would be really funny. I don't hate that idea. Right. It depends on what kind of energy we're trying to get out of this, right? Is this chaos Anne of Green Gables or?
Of course it's chaos Anne of Green Gables. Yeah, I mean, they'll have some heart at the end, but, or I guess Sweetums, right? The big, giant, tall guy.
So Sweetums, I was also thinking for Matthew, just because he's also sort of, doesn't say much, but very much a presence anywhere he is.
Right.
So Anne's first teacher, the terrible one, is Statler and Waldorf.
Oh, I was going Sam Eagle.
Oh, Sam Eagle. Oh, totally.
No. Statler and Waldorf are off to the side being like, that's not raspberry cordial. That's
they're just the Greek chorus. Totally.
No. Sam Eagle is Mr. Phillips.
I do think that if Miss Piggy would refuse to play Mrs. Lind, which I would understand if she did, Camilla the chicken would be great as Mrs. Lind.
Yeah, don't hate that. Well, then...
and then Gonzo is Mr. Lind?
Gonzo is Mr. Lind?
It kind of changes their dynamic a little bit, but I'm okay with that.
Right. Camilla's obviously in charge of that relationship anyway.
Yeah.
Wait. Fozzie Bear is Miss Stacy.
Oh, yes. Fozzie Bear is Miss Stacy. That would be so good. I love Fozzie Bear.
Kermit is Gilbert.
Obviously. We didn't even have to say that. Everybody knew. Miss Piggy. Again, this is in the universe where she refuses to be Mrs. Lind.
Josie Pye.
Oh, I was going to go with Aunt Josephine.
Oh, no. Josie Pye.
But could you imagine them running and jumping on her and she's in the bed? That would be so funny. Miss Piggy would chew all the furniture. It'd be so great.
She's going to chew all the furniture anyway. I love
That's true. Oh my goodness. I love
it. All right. Jim Henson, Muppet creators out there. Who owns them right now? Disney? Call us.
Yeah, call us. We have ideas. We have Anne of Green Gables related ideas.
I was going to talk about some of my other favorite Christmas movies, but honestly, I think we're good. I think this is exactly what we wanted to talk about.
Perfect. I love it. Well, Kindred Spirits, thank you for going down that whimsical path with us. And just a real quick pause before we start our episode for real. Would you please follow us on Instagram at kindredspirits.bookclub for episode updates, news from the wider Montgomeryverse, and of course, plenty of bookish memes. And if you are enjoying the show, a 5-star rating or review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen means the world to us. It's the easiest way to help other Kindred Spirits discover the podcast. Another way you can support us is by using our new bookshop.org link, which you can find in our show notes, on our website, and in our Instagram profile. We're getting so official, you guys! We have gone ahead and put all the books that we've recommended in that bookshop link, as well as some of our very favorite editions of Ella Montgomery's books. So all those pretty books that you see on our Instagram feed, we've gone ahead and linked them there as well, so you can get one of your own. And if you shop at that bookshop.org link, You will be helping independent bookstores, and you will be helping us as we get a small affiliate commission that will help us keep bringing you this podcast. So check it out when you get a chance, and thank you so very much.
Well, let's move right into this episode, and it gets a little bit more somber from here on out. And let's talk a little bit about our kindred spirit of the episode, none other than the good doctor of Glen St. Mary and the head of household at Ingleside, Gilbert Blythe.
Is Gilbert the head of household, or is that Susan?
Good question. But I think even Susan will mostly acquiesce to Gilbert's commands. In Rilla of Ingleside, we see a lot more of Gilbert than we have in any previous book other than Anne's House of Dreams. He takes his role of family protector very seriously, looking out for his wife's safety and health, for Rilla's growth and emotional development, and for the moral undertakings of his older children. We see him as an engaged father, a caring husband, an active leader in the community, and on a few occasions as a vulnerable human in his own right, wrestling with his own principles and ideals in light of his worry and fear for his family.
For our quote of the episode, we wanted to reflect on the deep romantic love that sustains Anne and Gilbert through these terrible war years. Quote, "Where are you wandering, Anna mine?" asked the doctor, who, even yet, after 24 years of marriage, occasionally addressed his wife thus, when nobody was about. Anne was sitting on the veranda steps, gazing absently over the wonderful bridal world of spring blossom. Beyond the white orchard was a copse of dark young firs and creamy wild cherries, where the robins were whistling madly, for it was evening, and the fire of early stars was burning over the maple grove. Anne came back with a little sigh. "I was just taking relief from intolerable realities in a dream, Gilbert. A dream that all our children were home again, and all small again, playing in Rainbow Valley. It is always so silent now. But I was imagining I heard clear voices and gay childish sounds coming up as I used to. I could hear Jem's whistle and Walter's yodel and the twins' laughter, and for just a few blessed minutes, I forgot about the guns on the Western Front and had a little false, sweet happiness." The doctor did not answer. Sometimes his work tricked him into forgetting for a few moments the Western Front, but not often. There was a good deal of gray now in his still thick curls that had not been there 2 years ago. Yet he smiled down into the starry eyes he loved, the eyes that had once been so full of laughter, and now seemed always full of unshed tears. This beautiful scene lets us see Anne and Gilbert as they were then and as they are now. Maud uses this word bridal to describe the blossoming orchard, which connects us as readers back not only to Anne and Gilbert's wedding day, but even tracing us all the way back in time to Anne's first encounter with the White Way of Delight. Anne also references her children in their youngest years running riot in Rainbow Valley while their laughter echoed up to Ingleside. And of course, we are still right here in the present, where those same children are in dangerous situations or are forced to grow up too soon, and Anne and Gilbert can't do anything to change it. This scene makes me think about how as we get older, we can often experience the present and the past at the same time. You know, the children that you see now who are like learning to drive or graduating from high school, those are still the same children who you taught to read or who you watched twirling at their preschool dance recitals. The person you married is still the person you went on that first date with, and that's the person who's still beside you today. So Anne and Gilbert are like living through these terrible years of anxiety and grief, but they're at the same time still the young people who are married at Green Gables, the same people who welcomed Jem into the world at the House of Dreams.
Our story club today is all about Anne and Gilbert and their role as parents in Rilla of Ingleside. After spending so many books with them in their adolescence and young adulthood, now we get to see them well into their adult lives. I was doing the math from that quote. If Gilbert is saying to Anne, this is 24 years after they've been married, that makes Anne 49, which is not that old.
I was thinking about that a lot during this book, that they are about our age.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, now Anne and Gilbert are respected community leaders in their village of Glen St. Mary. Gilbert, of course, is the doctor, and Anne is involved in social life and charity work throughout the town. We'll talk a little bit about how their leadership shows up in this book, but largely in the context of setting an example for their children, who are almost grown themselves. We got the impression from Anne of Ingleside and Rainbow Valley that Anne and Gilbert were ideal parents, gentle and loving, infinitely understanding and patient, who only made just rules and had their children's implicit trust. We've critiqued that in our past seasons as being a little too neat. No parent is perfect, and we don't think that busy parents of 6 spirited children got it right every single time, even with the staunch Susan Baker in their corner. But we get this very idealized version of parenting young children in those books. Almost like Maud couldn't let Anne make mistakes. Perhaps Anne was already too beloved in the cultural zeitgeist that she didn't feel like she could write anything that could be construed as critical of such a beloved heroine. We know Maud can write interesting, thoughtful parent-child relationships. I mean, we saw that with Anne and Marilla. In Rilla of Ingleside, that idealized version of parenting just doesn't hold up against the backdrop of war. How do you ideally parent during war? The Blythes, like many families at that time, had to make difficult and terrible choices. And while we think they mostly make the best decisions they can, there's plenty of room for discussion, which is why we wanted to do this episode. The other thing we wanted to think about with this episode is how parenting teenagers and young adults is still parenting, even when it looks a lot more hands-off. All of those lessons about values and integrity Anne and Gilbert gave to their children in their youngest years are being put to the test now. And the Blythe kids are all balancing the need to do what they believe to be right with the need for their parents' guidance and approval. At the outset of the book, Jem is 21, very much his own man, but he still checks with his parents before enlisting and values their counsel. Meanwhile, Rilla, just turned 15, needs her parents to nudge her in the right direction. And then all the others are somewhere along that spectrum.
So let's begin with what we know about Anne and Gilbert as parents. We know that they are somewhat protective, and they don't want their children, especially Rilla, to grow up too fast. On the night of the Dance of the Lights, Susan says, quote, "Mrs. Dr. Blythe doesn't approve of little girls dressing like grown-up ones." Anne also insists that Rilla wears sensible shoes to row over to the dance. And later on in the book, we see Rilla choose to style her hair sort of low on the nape of her neck because she knows that her mother wouldn't have permitted her to wear it all the way up. And we know from Anne of Ingleside in Rainbow Valley that Anne has always valued her children having a carefree and fun childhood. The Meredith kids reap significant social consequences from some of their shenanigans, but the Blythe kids are protected by their parents. They're guided, but rarely punished. We even see how much Anne laughs at some of their antics, right? She kind of enjoys it as much as they do. Think Walter riding the pig through town. Anne also loves that they all love Rainbow Valley, a beautiful outdoor space where they can develop their own relationship with nature. Gilbert is a very protective father, especially where Rilla is concerned. And I think an early example of that in this book is we learn that when Walter had typhoid, Gilbert wouldn't tell Rilla how ill Walter actually was because he didn't want her to worry.
But although the Blythes take care to look out for their children, they also encourage them academically and professionally. They support Jem's desire to go to medical school. Gilbert even thinks to himself that Jem's fingers are those of a born surgeon. They ensure that Nan and Di go to Redmond instead of spending extra time teaching. And they nurture Walter's skills as a poet. Other than Rilla, all the Blythe children go to Queen's Academy. The older ones spend some time teaching in local schools and then went on to Redmond College. So the Blythes aren't keeping their children tied to the village. They are encouraging them to go to school in Charlottetown, teach in other towns on the island, go to Kingsport for college. They want their children to be able to experience places other than the village they grew up in. And despite the family's wealth, they all get the opportunity to make their own money and experience independence by working outside of Glen St. Mary. There's nothing parochial about Anne and Gilbert's protective approach. It's clearly important to them that their children feel that they can travel and be, at least on some level, citizens of a world that extends beyond the Glen.
This value is really put to the test as the Blythe sons enlist in the Canadian military to fight in World War I. Gilbert takes very seriously his role of bringing world news to Ingleside. In fact, maybe a third of the chapters in Rilla of Ingleside begin with Gilbert announcing what is happening in the war at that point in time. Now, on a very practical level, this is helpful to orient the reader to time and place, but it also tells us a lot about Gilbert as head of household and as a father. I'm sure there were plenty of households during that time who were not as well informed as Ingleside, where the newspapers were not read aloud around the dinner table, and where history, geography, and politics were not discussed freely with every resident. Gilbert ensures that everyone, his wife and children, the school teacher who boards with them, his housekeeper, are aware of what is happening on the other side of the world. But this tendency also goes to a parenting value that Gilbert and Anne clearly share, and that is that their children are not only aware of what is happening around the world, but that they feel like they're part of a global community, and they feel that their voices and actions can make a difference. As parents of young adults, Anne and Gilbert generally are not telling their children explicitly what they can and can't do, with some notable exceptions in this book, which we'll discuss, but instead they're leading by example. When England joined the war, Anne and Gilbert wasted no time getting involved. Anne and her friend Miss Cornelia get a village Red Cross society off the ground, and Gilbert and Reverend Meredith start a patriotic society. We recently talked to Laura Robinson in our episode about Rilla and Goodness about what those village Red Cross societies were doing, often raising money for communities in crisis and producing sheets, bandages, socks, and other materials that were needed to keep soldiers clean, dry, and safe, often at factory-level production scales. But Reagan, what do you think was going on with the Men's Patriotic Society?
Good question. I imagine there's probably some work with raising money as well. And agricultural needs would have been really high at that time, right? To support the troops. And Prince Edward Island was very much supplying a lot of agricultural support, as well as general patriotic duties, maybe disseminating information like Gilbert does at home. And if I remember from Anne's House of Dreams, Gilbert was often asked to speak at political meetings. So I think there's probably a lot of opportunities for that as well. Probably around politics, around enlistment, probably about donating to the war effort or adhering to rations. And as a doctor, I wonder if Gilbert was involved at all in any treatment of wounded soldiers after they returned home, or in the medical community discussing those injuries and treatments. I'm sure all the older men had to step back into roles they may have previously ceded to their sons to pick up the slack as the young men enlist.
Sure.
We know that as the town doctor, Gilbert is a prominent community leader, probably second in influence only to the ministers in the town, and his opinion counts for a lot. So when men see Gilbert throw his support behind the war effort, they will too. In fact, we know that even Whiskers on the Moon, Miranda Pryor's pacifist father, is somewhat cowed by Gilbert. Really uses this dynamic to great effect when putting on Miranda's wedding to Joe. Mr. Pryor consents to have Miranda go to Ingleside to ostensibly do Red Cross work because, quote, he did not want to offend Dr. Blythe, and he knew that if he refused to allow Miranda to do any Red Cross work, public opinion would make the Glen too hot for comfort.
With Anne and Gilbert jumping immediately into supporting the war effort, it comes as no surprise that their oldest son, Jem, is ready to do his part. It happens quickly and inevitably the very next day after war is declared, as the Blythes are lingering around the dinner table. They receive a long-distance call from Charlottetown for Jem, which he accepts, and as he's speaking, his family can read on his face what the conversation entails. His face is flushed, his eyes are glowing, and his mother and sisters are pale, knowing with certainty what this portends. When he gets off the phone, Jem speaks directly to Gilbert and says, "They're calling for volunteers in town, Father. Scores have joined up already. I'm going in tonight to enlist." It's so matter of fact. It's so direct. There's no room for discussion. This is pure practical Jem. Anne responds, "Oh, little Jem." And Maud tells us that she cried out brokenly. Anne had not called Jem Little Jem in years, but she does so in this moment, and she says, "Oh, no, no, little Jem." And that's like kind of all she says. But that contains all of Anne's heartbreak, these few simple words. And Jem says, "I must, Mother. I'm right, am I not, Father?" Dr. Blythe had risen. He was very pale too, and his voice was husky, but he did not hesitate. "Yes, Jem, yes, if you feel that way, yes." Mrs. Blythe covered her face. Oh, Anne, this is such a heart-wrenching moment. Anne is, quote, broken. She's covering her face, presumably to hide her tears. Or maybe she can't even look at her son right now. Maybe seeing him is too hard, knowing all the dangers that lie ahead for him. Gilbert, for his part, is trying very hard to be strong, right? We're told his voice is husky with emotion, so we know he's also devastated. But he responds without hesitation that Jem must do what he feels is right.
And this is where we see the principles Anne and Gilbert passed on to their children, to stand up for what they believe in, to be citizens of a global community, to protect the safety of their home, in full effect. Susan asks if she has heard right, if Gilbert and Anne will permit Jem to go. Quote, "We can't stop him," said Mrs. Blythe, chokingly. "Oh, Gilbert." Dr. Blythe came up behind his wife and took her hand gently, looking down into the sweet gray eyes that he had only once before seen filled with such imploring anguish as now. They both thought of that other time, the day years ago in the House of Dreams when little Joyce had died. "Would you have him stay, Anne, when the others are going? when he thinks it is his duty? Would you have him so selfish and small-souled? There's a lot happening in this passage. Anne and Gilbert don't say a lot, but they manage to communicate everything to one another in this brief moment. Their fear for Jem, the traumatic memory of losing their first daughter, the fact that Jem was the baby who put them back together again, and now he's in so much danger. The fact that they can't control him, that he will do as he believes he must, and they cannot wrap him in a blanket and put him back in his cradle, knowing that he will be safe there. And mixed in with all this grief and worry is a thread of pride, too. Pride that he is not, quote, selfish and small-souled, that he is brave and principled. Gilbert and Anne leave the room, Anne telling them that she just needs some more time, and Gilbert comforting her.
Oh my gosh, this scene. But can I just say that I love their marriage? He is so protective of her in this moment. Even though Jem has declared he's off to war and every single person in the room is sort of like falling apart, the only person that Gilbert has decided that he needs to help right then is Anne. I'm also kind of interested, I'd love your take, in Anne telling Susan and evidently believing that she can't stop Jem from enlisting. I think she's really underestimating herself. I think she absolutely could stop Jem from enlisting if she thought that was right. But the nuance, I think, here is that Anne and Gilbert have raised their children with such a strong sense of righteous honor, so they could forbid Jem from enlisting, but it would fly in the face of every lesson they've ever given him. And I think it would also fly in the face of Jem's essential nature, right? Jem is a natural born leader. He's very action oriented. He's competent and principled. And since his birth, inspired by his namesake, Captain Jim, it's like he's been destined for adventure. Anne and Gilbert know that about their son, and they nourished that in their son. They're not going to take that away from him now.
And I think she might mean she cannot stop him from enlisting without damaging their relationship permanently. Because if she did forbid him, either he would go anyway against her specific wishes, or he would stay and be resentful of her. If she truly demanded that he not go, he might feel like he had no choice but to stay. However, it seems likely that war sentiment being what it was at that time, Jem would eventually go anyway, with anger and resentment and betrayal lying between them. I don't think she could bear that idea of having that be between them when he is going and will be in so much danger.
Right.
And I think this is the specific pain of parenting that is hard on its own, but is now magnified times 100 in a war situation. This pride in seeing your child be their best self, right? He's selfless. He's a leader, all things that they probably are really thrilled to see Jem develop. But they also know that this best self will take them away from you or make life harder for themselves in some way. And in this case, it's going to put them directly in harm's way. Once Anne and Gilbert have survived the immediate shock of Jem's announcement that he will enlist, they go back to leading by example, throwing themselves into the cause and keeping busy and calm. Anne tells Susan and Rilla that when Jem leaves for training camp, she will, quote, send my boy off tomorrow with a smile. He shall not carry away with him the remembrance of a weak mother who had not the courage to send when he had the courage to go. I hope none of us will cry.
Rilla follows her mother's example, and she puts on a bright, brave face at the train station. However, Rilla does observe this little exchange between Anne and Mrs. Drew. Is this Bertie Shakespeare Drew's mother?
I think it must be.
I think it must be. So Mrs. Drew says to Anne, you know, again, this is the morning that Jem is leaving for the war. Anne is like barely holding it together. And, you know, the neighbor leans over and says, I don't know how you can stand this, Mrs. Blythe. I couldn't if it was my poor boy. And then Rilla later tells her diary that Anne's gray eyes flashed as she retorted, it might have been worse, Mrs. Drew. I might have had to urge him to go. Mrs. Drew did not understand, but Rilla did. She flung up her head. Her brother did not have to be urged to go. So a well-deserved bit of pettiness for Anne, we think. And it inspires Rilla to continue to be proud of her brother on such a difficult day. After Jem leaves, and the Blythes realize that Dog Monday has taken up his vigil at the train station, we see that Gilbert ensures that Dog Monday will be kenneled, fed, and looked after at the station while Jem is gone. Here's Gilbert. He's protecting the whole family, even the dog. And I wonder if maybe Gilbert's sort of paternal bent to Dog Monday is how he cares for Jem in his absence. Like, I may not be able to protect my son, but I can make sure his dog is taken care of.
Yeah, I think that's right. Well, and also Gilbert is a dog person.
Yeah.
Gilbert was there for Jem, remember, in Anne of Ingleside, when it turned out that Bruno wasn't really his dog?
Mm-hmm.
Gilbert knows what Dog Monday means to Jem. While Jem's contribution to the war effort is impressive and grand, Rilla isn't sure what she can do to help. And here's where Anne and Gilbert step into a more active parenting role. Rilla is 15, and we understand she's a fairly young and sheltered 15 as well. But now it is time for her to step up, and Rilla knows it. But she still needs some guidance and handholding. Rilla tells Anne that she has to be able to do something to help, but she doesn't know what. Quote, I'm only a girl. I can't do anything to win the war, she tells Anne, who tells Rilla precisely what she thinks about whether girls can make a difference by instantly rattling off a few things Rilla can do, starting that very moment. Quote, the cotton has come up for the sheets, said Mrs. Blythe. You can help Nan and Di make them up. And Rilla, don't you think you could organize a junior Red Cross among the young girls? So Rilla is a little bewildered, I think, and protests that she's never done anything like that. And Anne replies, very simply, we will all have to do a great many things in the months ahead of us that we have never done before, Rilla.
And Anne is talking about herself as much as anyone else here, isn't she? This war is asking so much of her, too. She's doing so many things she's never had to do before. And while Anne is providing more active guidance to Rilla than to her other daughters, right? Nan and Di are already over there with the yards of cotton sewing sheets. Anne's also not coddling her, right? She's not like explaining to her how exactly to form a junior Red Cross or how to sew a sheet. She's giving Rilla the chance to sort this out for herself. What do we think of Anne as a mom in this moment? Do we think that Anne is maybe like a little annoyed that Rilla is sort of over here hand-wringing while everyone else is already hard at work?
I don't get the vibe that Anne is annoyed by Rilla. I think she just knows where she's starting from. After all, if Rilla has been petted and spoiled a bit up to this point, who was doing the spoiling and petting? Like,
True.
I think Anne knows that she was part of that too, right? Good parents are attuned to their kids, and Anne is definitely attuned to Rilla. We talked in Rilla's episodes about how taking charge of the Red Cross is a big part of Rilla's growth arc. Anne sees the capabilities in her daughter. Capabilities that Rilla hasn't exactly been utilizing thus far, and she's giving her the chance to step up. But she's providing a little bit of scaffolding for that. Not only that, she's helping Rilla contextualize her part in this war. Remember, Rilla writes in her diary, oh, she wishes she was a boy and she could go too. More for like the romance and grand gesture of it than at this point really understanding the stakes of war. It just seems like this was a grand and brave thing that Jem did, and she wants to also be grand and brave.
She's caught up in the romance and the patriotic fervor of the moment.
Right. But here Anne is pointing out they will all have to do things they haven't done before. It's not necessarily going to be big and romantic. She's setting expectations for how Rilla will participate in this as well.
Mm-hmm.
Up to this point, we see that Rilla has been wishing that her parents and the other adults in her life, her older siblings also, saw her as more grown up. Like her big thing is like, I don't want them to see me as a kid. So Anne is starting that process of treating Rilla like a grown-up, but she's setting some of the expectations about what being a grown-up entails. And it's not about wearing long dresses.
Well, and in much the same way, Gilbert challenges Rilla to rise to the occasion in the matter of baby Jims. So when Rilla brings home an infant in a soup tureen, Gilbert is on the scene right away and asks Rilla flat out, what in the world is this? Direct quote from the text, what in the world is this? So Rilla gives him the whole story, and ultimately she's like, I just couldn't leave the baby there, Dad. And we love Gilbert's response. Quote, what are you going to do with it? Asked the doctor coolly. Rilla hadn't exactly expected this kind of question.
She's like, you tell me.
Like, Rilla had been expecting her parents and Susan to save the day, hadn't she? But Gilbert is presented with this interesting conundrum, right? In order to accept the additional responsibility of a new baby at Ingleside, he's either going to have to make more work for his wife and for Susan. Like, and keep in mind, his wife was only a few weeks ago sobbing, thinking about Jem's babyhood. Or he's going to have to put his youngest daughter to the test and hold her accountable for an impulsive decision. Gilbert takes a beat. Maud tells us that, quote, Dr. Blythe walked up and down the kitchen for a moment or two while the baby stared at the white walls of the soup tureen. Absolutely hilarious POV moment for baby Jims there. But Gilbert takes that time and he ultimately does make this choice. Rilla must care for the baby. He, Anne, and Susan can provide advice, but the work, the actual work of it, must all be Rilla. So, just as when Anne suggested that Rilla lead the Junior Reds, Rilla is sure she cannot do what her father is suggesting. Gilbert calmly tells her that she must, or the baby will return to the indifferent care of Meg Conover and an orphanage, where he may not survive. Quote, the doctor walked out of the kitchen, looking very stern and immovable. In his heart, he knew well that the small inhabitant of the big soup tureen would remain at Ingleside, but he meant to see if Rilla could not be induced to rise to the occasion. It's a great moment for Gilbert.
Yeah, he's setting an expectation for her, just like Anne did, giving her the opportunity to make a decision about what to do with it. He also sees that Rilla has a bigger capacity to be unselfish than she's yet had a chance to demonstrate, and is giving her room to build new aspects of her character. In this way, it reminds me a little of the way that Gilbert handled the situation with Jem and little Bruno the dog in Anne of Ingleside. In that moment, Gilbert did not tell Jem what was the right thing to do. Instead, he gave Jem the opportunity to make the hard choice himself and then supported him through it. Both of those situations are ones in which his children have to make a difficult sacrifice. And in both of those, he doesn't tell them what to do or what is the right thing to do or why they should make a sacrifice. He lets the decision come from them. That's where character growth really comes from. We can't tell our children what the right thing to do is. We can only model it and provide opportunities for it and then support them through it. They have to make decisions and wrestle with the consequences of it on their own.
I think that's a great comparison. You know, we do see how that early moment with Bruno kind of foreshadows Gilbert's decisions as a father in this book, whether it is Rilla and the baby or the boys choosing to enlist. You know, he is doing this thing where he empowers their sense of principle and their own sense of what's right, and makes space for them to deal with whatever the consequences of that are, if it's sacrifice and difficulty or whatever may come from that. So the scene with the baby also shows us how Gilbert really takes his role as Anne's husband very seriously. He's so deeply protective of her, right? There are all these examples throughout the book. Gilbert isn't going to let Rilla trouble Anne with the baby, and later on we see that he won't let Anne overwork herself. You know, he even takes Anne to visit Diana in Avonlea after Walter's death when he feels like she needs more rest and comfort than Ingleside can provide.
Let's talk about Walter and how Anne and Gilbert show up for him in this book. So we know Jem enlists right away. And while Anne and Gilbert are terribly worried for their son, they kind of understand that it was inevitable that Jem would heed the call. Walter is not a foregone conclusion in the same way. For one, he had typhoid the year before and is still recovering and is not entirely healthy yet. But maybe more importantly, they know how sensitive he is, how the thought of war, of ugliness, is conscience shocking to Walter in a way that Jem doesn't experience. They're two very different young men, and Anne and Gilbert know this. There's also this sense, especially in the early days of the war, that it's enough for a family to give one son. So while Walter personally feels a great deal of social pressure to enlist, that's not coming from Anne, Gilbert, or anyone at Ingleside. Nobody there thinks that Walter is not brave, thinks that Walter should be enlisting. This is all internal to Walter.
Mm-hmm. I wish we could hear some of the conversations with Walter about enlisting. We know that Walter was deeply conflicted about it and really feeling a lot of anguish. And he shares that with Rilla to some degree, but doesn't it seem likely that he would have spoken to Gilbert and Anne about it as well? And maybe we don't hear those conversations because we at this point know them well enough to know what they would have said, right? They would have counseled him to do what he thought was right, to follow his moral compass. But I think that Anne would have held space for Walter's internal conflict between believing in the righteousness of this particular war while also abhorring violence and war in a more general sense. When Walter does enlist, Anne tells Rilla that she had known for several days that he would. And I think this is an interesting line because it can kind of be read in two different ways, right? The first way is that perhaps Walter just told her a few days ago that he planned to enlist. But I think the other reading of this idea that Anne had known for several days that Walter was going to enlist is just because she knew. Like you said, she's just attuned to her children. She intuited when her son made up his mind, even before he spoke to her directly about it. Walter tells Rilla, though, that, quote, we didn't want you to know till the evening was over, meaning that they didn't want to tell Rilla he was enlisting until her concert was over. Then, of course, that horrible Irene Howard lets it slip at the worst possible moment as they're
No. Irene did not let it slip. Right. Irene deliberately took that moment to make it about herself.
Yeah, that's true. So Irene Howard, just being herself. But I wonder, who is we? We didn't want you to know till the evening was over. Is that we, Anne, Gilbert, and Walter? Like, does that indicate that the three of them had this conversation ahead of time? And as much as Rilla has had to grow up in the past year, the Blythes' decision to delay telling Rilla about Walter, I think that's just further evidence that the family still wants to protect her as much as they can from all of this hardship and heartbreak.
For all that Rilla has grown up, they still know that she's young and she's a child. And Anne, in particular, is very aware of how much of her girlhood Rilla is sacrificing to this war already. Well, Rilla is beside herself with Walter leaving, but Anne continues to lead by example for her children. As hard as it must be to give another son to this war, she stays calm and steadfast. Rilla sees how her mother acts and manages to follow suit, remembering her mother telling her, quote, "When our women fail in courage, shall our men be fearless still." At the station on the day Walter leaves, Anne is not quite able to manage the smile for Walter that she did when Jem left. She knows even better now the weight of this sacrifice. After Walter also enlists, Anne's tendency is to distract herself with work. Every time we see her on the page, she's busy, baking shortbread for Jem, helping with Miranda's wedding, preserving rhubarb. She even goes to Charlottetown often for Red Cross Society meetings. And for a while, Anne and Gilbert rarely appear in the book, which is also significant in terms of their relationship to their children. This book truly becomes Rilla's story. Rilla is having her own experiences and small adventures. First kisses, war weddings, letters from the front. She doesn't need Anne and Gilbert to structure her days for her or to tell her how to help anymore. But there are some cases that truly need a mother's wisdom, and Rilla goes to Anne for help navigating her affairs of the heart. Rilla has promised Kenneth she will not kiss anyone while he is away. And when Fred Arnold comes to say goodbye before enlisting, she cannot give him the kiss he asked for. Having two beaux once seemed like Rilla's greatest ambition, but now that she is experiencing it, she's miserable. Anne is able to comfort Rilla and give her some hard-won wisdom. So Rilla explains the whole thing and why she couldn't kiss Fred. And Anne is a little taken aback. Like, Rilla, for heaven's sake, it's okay to give this poor boy going off to war one kiss. But Rilla says, quote, "But I couldn't, Mother. I promised Ken when he went away that I wouldn't kiss anybody else until he came back." This was another high explosive for poor Mother. She exclaimed with the queerest little catch in her voice, "Rilla, are you engaged to Kenneth Ford?" "I don't know," I sobbed. "You don't know?" repeated Mother. Then I had to tell her the whole story too, and every time I tell it, it seems sillier and sillier to imagine that Ken meant anything serious. I felt idiotic and ashamed by the time I got through. Mother sat a little while in silence. Then she came over, sat down next to me, and took me in her arms. "Don't cry, dear little Rilla, my Rilla. You have nothing to reproach yourself with in regard to Fred. And if Leslie West's son asked you to keep your lips for him, I think you may consider yourself engaged to him. But oh, my baby, my last little baby, I have lost you. The war has made a woman of you too soon."
My heart is breaking for Anne. Here she is. She's sending her boys off to war. Her older daughters are away from home. She has like one child left at home. This is the baby who she thought she'd have many more years with. And now she's learning in an instant that no, even that little baby is all grown up too.
I love that Anne and Rilla get more of a typical mother-daughter moment than just the shared experience of the war. Now, granted, the war gives this relationship with Rilla and Ken far more stakes than would be normal, but still, Anne comforts Rilla through the experience and provides feedback and reassurance that Rilla needs. She doesn't minimize Rilla's experience, even though Rilla is feeling it to be kind of silly herself. Anne never makes Rilla feel silly. And even with this backdrop of war going on, and Anne herself never really had this experience. Anne kept all her heartbreak and romantic confusion internal to herself. We never see her really confide in Marilla.
Rilla leaves the conversation feeling a little more sure about her standing with Kenneth, and you just know that Anne goes right to her room and writes Leslie the funniest letter. Guess what the kids have been doing?
Did you know about this? Well, news of the Battle of the Somme reaches Ingleside, and a worried Anne throws herself into her work. She begs Gilbert to let her. Oh, let me work. Let me work, Gilbert, she entreated feverishly. While I'm working, I don't think so much. If I'm idle, I imagine everything. Rest is only torture for me. My two boys are on the frightful Somme front, and Shirley pores day and night over aviation literature and says nothing. But I see the purpose growing in his eyes. No, I cannot rest. Don't ask it of me, Gilbert. But the doctor was inexorable. I can't let you kill yourself, Anne girl, he said. When the boys come back, I want a mother here to welcome them. And again, there's that protective instinct from Gilbert. He's focusing so much of his care and concern on Anne, and as much as he loves her, that's also for the benefit of his children, because that's what he can do. Right. He can't protect them while they're at war, but he can make sure that they have the things they love best to come home to.
And there was so much in the sort of mythology about this war, about protecting home, protecting the safe space, leaving the memory of the mothers and sweethearts and pets, that Gilbert wants to preserve that for his sons.
Gilbert won't let the war take Anne too. Anne may be keeping a stiff upper lip and a calm demeanor, but the facade is crumbling with all the stress, worry, and anxiety. Channeling that nervous energy into work makes sense, but it's starting to run her ragged. Ultimately, Gilbert's role as news bearer means that he is the one who brings the news that Walter has died in action at Courcelette. When he tells Rilla, looking older and grayer than ever, she faints in his arms and does not awaken for hours. And what a terrible burden it must be for a father to have to be the one to tell his wife, his daughter, about his son's death, to be the bearer of such devastating news that has surely devastated him as well.
I can't. I'm just crying even thinking about it, but I could see that just, him standing there holding her in his arms while the sort of weight of everything settled in.
Anne takes ill with grief and shock, and she cannot get out of bed. Rilla knows she must try to fill the gap and forces herself out of bed to do the work her mother cannot do. Rilla tries to be brave. She laughs and wears white. Anne asks her not to wear mourning colors. You can see Anne wanting to preserve some lightness and some of Rilla's youth, even amid all of this tragedy, by refusing to allow her to wear black. Before Christmas, Gilbert takes Anne to Avonlea to recuperate with Diana. It's clear he knows she can't be at home for Christmas, with two sons gone and one never to return. Gilbert is doing beautiful work here, supporting his wife and supporting his daughter. But what about his grief for his son? What does he do with it? Is he channeling that grief into what he can do? Take care of Anne and Rilla? Does Gilbert have the space to cry and mourn and question that he must need after the death of his son?
Yeah, we don't see that. We don't see what he does with his grief. Several months later, Shirley tells Anne and Gilbert that he, too, intends to enlist. Again, they do see it coming. His 18th birthday is coming up, and he has made no secret of his interest in the Flying Corps. Susan has been spoiling him all winter long with his favorite foods, right? Even she knows it's coming. But this confirmation it rocks them. And Shirley does himself no favors. Shirley is just so chill about it and just tells them now he's 18. It's about time he joined up. Anne goes cold and pale, and she says, 2 of my sons have gone, and one will never return. Must I give you 2, Shirley? You wouldn't have me a slacker, Mother. I can get into the Flying Corps. What say, Dad? Shirley?
What say, Dad?
What say, Dad?
Let's just jaunt on down, Shirley.
He's so casual about it. And on the one hand, I think that's just Shirley. That's his character. He's a very easygoing guy. But on the other hand,
listen, Kelly, this is all we know about Shirley.
That's true.
We don't know if this is consistent with his character. When have we heard Shirley speak more than 2 words?
But on the other hand, Shirley has been telling them that he intends to enlist for years. When the older boys enlisted at the beginning of the book, Shirley was telling them, I'm right behind you. He's been sitting around the dining room reading aviation materials. They all knew this was coming. And sure enough, Gilbert has an unsteady moment as he, quote, had known this moment was coming, yet he was not altogether prepared for it. He answered slowly, I won't try to hold you back from what you believe to be your duty, but you must not go unless your mother says you may.
Well, I think this is truly about his love for Anne and his fear that she might not survive the death of another one of her sons. Fear of what the additional anxiety and stress of Shirley being in harm's way will do to her. He's acknowledging that Shirley is old enough to make up his own mind, but also reminding Shirley that he is part of a family. And they all know now, in a way they did not when Jem enlisted, that the families on the home front are sacrificing something precious as well. This is Shirley's decision, but it comes at a cost for him and for his family. And he's asking Shirley to acknowledge that because Shirley, again, he's so casual about it all. When Walter went, they all knew how much Walter agonized about his decision. This was not a light decision. They did not have to ask him to think of his mother or others. Shirley announces it as if he's like signing up to play football. And I think Gilbert is both watching out for Anne and reminding Shirley of the stakes here. It's not just stakes for himself, it's for the whole family.
Yeah, that's a nice interpretation. It's a nice moment for Gilbert. Well, Anne ultimately agrees in what we are sure must have been both a harrowing decision and ultimately a very simple one, because we know that she is not going to tell her son not to follow his conscience. Susan, of course, is beside herself with Shirley leaving, and Gilbert is grimly wistful and nostalgic as he, quote, stood for a moment in the great silent living room that had once been full of children's laughter. Our last son, he said aloud. A good, sturdy, sensible lad, too. Always reminded me of my father. I suppose I ought to be proud that he wanted to go. I was proud when Jem went, even when Walter went. But our house has left us desolate. This is the worst kind of empty nest syndrome, isn't it?
I can't even imagine it, to be honest. If Shirley was wanting to, let's say move out west for a career or educational opportunity in non-wartime, well, that's sad, but they wouldn't be afraid for him. It would be just almost like that kind of simple, selfish sort of sadness most parents have when their children move away. But this is not just sadness that their children are growing up. It's fear that they won't get to continue to grow up.
On the girls' side of things, Faith Meredith leaves Redmond to join the war effort in the Voluntary Aid Detachment, which is a civilian nursing corps that's over in Britain. And Di asks if she can go too. Now, in contrast to what happened with Shirley, Gilbert refuses to allow Di to go. And he says this is for Anne's sake.
That's an interesting choice too, especially when we compare it to what just happened with Shirley. With Shirley, they acknowledge that his desire to enlist is for this greater cause, even if it causes Anne grief and anxiety. They don't feel like they can tell him no. It feels like it's a moral imperative for him to fight, at least from Shirley's perspective, maybe from their perspective too. But they do feel comfortable telling Di that she can't go to help, even though that's just as much of a moral imperative too, right?
I'm sure Di feels that way.
Di would be far away, but she wouldn't be in direct danger like Shirley. And she wants to be of use to concretely help, just as Shirley does. Does Gilbert feel more comfortable making this kind of a paternalistic decision for Di because Di is a girl? Is it because Di can still be of use and make contributions to the war from Kingsport and the Red Cross? She doesn't need to go to England to do that, but Shirley can't fight from Canada. Or is this just one child too many for the Blythes to send to Europe?
All the Blythe children feel that they must help, and they are looking for ways to do so. The boys by enlisting, Nan and Di by serving with the Red Cross, and Rilla, who once needed guidance from Anne and Gilbert, has learned how to look around for what needs to be done and do it. During harvest season on the island, without sufficient able-bodied young men to do the harvesting, women and older men were out in the fields. Among them, Susan and Mary Vance. Rilla does her part without being asked, calmly telling Gilbert that she's going to work in the general store for a month. By the way, Father, said Rilla, I'm going to take Jack Flagg's place in his father's store for a month. I promised him today that I would, if you didn't object. Then he can help the farmers get the harvest in. I don't think I'd be much use in a harvest myself, though lots of the girls are, but I can set Jack free while I do this work. Jim's isn't much bother in the daytime now, and I'll always be home at night. Do you think you'll like weighing out sugar and beans, and trafficking in butter and eggs? Said the doctor, twinkling. Probably not. That isn't the question. It's just one way of doing my bit. So Rilla went behind Mr. Flagg's counter for a month. I kind of love how Maud describes Gilbert as twinkling here. I think he's twinkling with pride. And I think Anne and Gilbert do this pretty well throughout the book. They tell Rilla, they tell all their children that they see them, they see how hard they're working, that they're proud of them.
And I think one of the things that he's proud of here is this initiative from Rilla. At this point, she does not need to be told how to help. She's looking around. She's seeing what needs to be done. She's volunteering. She's even remembered that she needs to make arrangements for gyms.
Yep.
Right.
And Gilbert is good about acknowledging that, telling her that he thinks she's doing good work. We see Rilla expressing to her diary that she's jealous of her siblings' more sort of like obviously dramatic contributions to the war effort. But in the midst of all this, Gilbert again reminds her that she is doing good work with Jims and the Junior Reds. So he's giving her that validation and positive feedback that help her continue to carry on. And even in their quiet moments alone together, Anne and Gilbert are also proudly acknowledging their children's efforts and endeavors in support of this war. I think that shows that they're a united parenting team. They're discussing and deciding together how to support their kids. And now we know this because Rilla overhears her mother saying some very nice things about her to Gilbert, right? She acknowledges Rilla's growth over the war years, and she says that they have become friends to one another, which is just a lovely thing to hear from your mother at any age. But we also know this because Anne and Gilbert seem to speak with one voice in this book. They are always in agreement. They always hold fast to their principles, even when it's painful. And we know that above all else, with all that they suffer and sacrifice in this book, they are proud of the good young men and women they have raised together. Phew, Reagan, is there going to be an episode this season that doesn't bring us to tears?
It's hard. It's so hard.
Focusing on everything Anne and Gilbert go through as parents, I think, is a really beautiful way to read Rilla of Ingleside, but it is emotional. So please take us to the birch path. We need your wisdom. Kindred spirits, I love it when we get to ask Reagan to put on her psychologist hat. Parenting is one of her areas of expertise, and I cannot wait to hear more of your take on Anne and Gilbert.
Aw, thanks, Kelly. Well, I need no such encouragement. I really love getting to see Anne and Gilbert as parents with their young adult children. They really inspire the kind of relationship I hope I have with my daughter when she's an adult. So in past Birch Paths, I've talked a little bit about some various aspects of parenting, from parenting styles to moral development to the dangers of parentification. And now I get to talk a little bit about development in teens and young adults and what that means for parenting, as well as development for the parents themselves. So we're going to take some of these concepts I've touched on before in regards to the children and take them into the next step for the teens. One of the things we see in this episode is the way that the groundwork that Anne and Gilbert have done in parenting have led to their current relationships with their kids now. It's actually interesting to me that Maud wrote Anne of Ingleside so much after this book because she kind of worked backwards. She knows who the kids turn out to be and what their grown relationships with Anne and Gilbert are. And then she kind of goes back and writes some of those moments that support that outcome. So if only parents really got a chance to do it that way. Let's use for this discussion Erik Erikson's theory around the stages of psychosocial development. Per Erik Erikson's theory, adolescents, the ages of 12 to 18, the main task is identity development. The task is identity versus role confusion. And essentially that means you are going to spend the time in your adolescence having experiences that will hopefully help you develop a solid sense of self, that the self that you present to the world and your internal sense of self are consistent. That's called fidelity. You spend your adolescence wrestling with others' want of you, what others expect from you, the way others perceive you, and then come to a place where you know what you want and who you are authentically. And you see this in the way that teens try on lots of different identities, the way they use hair, makeup, clothing to signal identity, and often adhering to those identities really rigidly for a while, or using social relationships to define themselves. That's why adults always worry about kids being like, oh my gosh, like all they do is they only want to talk about or do this one thing, or they only want to dress in this one particular way, because that's the way that they are trying on identity. They might struggle with religious or social expectations, with family expectations, and they have to sort through all of those other expectations and come to find out what they truly believe and want from themselves. So you see this at the beginning of the book, that Rilla is very committed to her persona as Lily of the Field. Beautiful, but without purpose or drive. She's like, I'm in. I am happy being without ambition as long as I can be pretty and popular. And then over the course of the book, she fights her way to figuring out her own sense of self. She discovers skills and personality traits she didn't know she had. Anyone who has been a teen themselves knows that a parent can't just tell a child who they are. They can only give space and support and reflect back to the teen what they see. This is something that the teens need to figure out for themselves. When Rilla jumps from her identity of lily of the field to the one in which she all of a sudden imagines herself wearing a smart uniform for the Red Cross, carrying a white notebook with a red cross emblazoned on it, that's her experimenting with identity. And as the kids say today, the aesthetic of the role is just as important as the role itself, because when you're in this developmental stage, the aesthetic is the role to a certain degree when you are 15, right? And tension often arises between parents and teens around identity. For instance, when a parent points out an inconsistency in identity or doesn't embrace a current identity. If you guys remember about the little velvet hat, we spent a lot of time talking about that last episode. When Anne points out the selfishness of buying that extravagant hat, Rilla overreacts because for her, buying that hat indicated her independence, right? She was being trusted to make an adult purchase on her own, and she was leaning into her identity as being a grown adult. And then when Anne points out that she's made a mistake, she feels young and foolish, and like that identity is in question. So she overreacts and then commits to wearing the hat for the course of the war. And this part of parenting is really hard. It is hard to watch your child struggle and not want to fix it. It is hard to see your child make choices that you can't save them from. And
yes, that is such a thing. I mean, I'm sure that's something that all parents deal with, but seeing that in this book is so heartbreaking, right? You're watching these kids make these choices where you just want to make all of this better.
Yeah. And what parents have to do in this moment is to gradually ease up on rules and restrictions, the control of parenthood. This is often where parents want to clamp down, right? I don't want them to make the wrong choices. So I'm going to put in more rules, more restriction, because I want to protect them. I don't want them to make any big mistakes that have repercussions they're not ready to handle. But this is really the moment where they have to start easing up. And they have to lean more into listening and asking questions and giving that non-judgmental space to try things out and learn the hard way from them. Teens and young adults, they just absolutely have to make their own mistakes. Parents have to be the soft place to fall rather than a guardrail. And this is a big shift from parenting little kids, in which you really do have to be a guardrail. Hopefully this is something that they've worked up to over time, right? Giving more and more opportunities for independence and providing kind of that scaffolding. And we can generally see that this is how it seems like Anne and Gilbert parent. We don't often see them rescuing their children from their scrapes, but rather being the place that they come back to, cry and receive comfort, and then are ready to try again. Anne and Gilbert give their kids a chance to make their own choices, and they reflect back pride and confidence in them. So that's kind of what's happening in adolescence. When we talk about human development, people think we just mean like baby to young adulthood, but we don't stop and we go through other developmental stages. So the psychosocial task of young adulthood is what's called intimacy versus isolation. So if in adolescence you've established a strong sense of self, then you are ready to develop real intimacy with other people, the vulnerable kind. And this can be in romantic relationships, certainly, but it's also in deep friendships, mentorships, family. You can make long-term commitments and form deep reciprocal relationships because you can balance making the sacrifices and compromises that relationships require without losing your sense of self. So you are being selfish in teenagerhood while you are developing your sense of identity actually helps you become a better partner down the road if you've had a chance to really develop an authentic sense of self, if that makes sense, right? What's interesting with Rilla of Ingleside is that the war is speeding up this process of development. It's throwing young people into the situation of having to make a long-term commitment quickly due to the young men shipping out. We've already talked a little bit about Rilla's relationship with Ken. She's still forming her identity, and now she's thrust into making a promise for a long-term relationship. Does she really know who she is yet? And here she is kind of having to commit to this idea. It's not even a proper engagement, really.
Right. Anne confirms that she can consider herself engaged to Kenneth, but like, again, they have spent minutes together at this point. Who does Rilla think she is? Does she know what she wants?
Jem and Faith Meredith, now they are older and they have had opportunities to explore identity development before the war. Jem is pursuing a medical degree, so he's obviously developed a sense of self around that. Faith is in college. She's at least part of the way through, because I think when she goes with the voluntary aid detachment to Europe, it's sort of implied she's finished at Redmond, right? She's graduated. And although their relationship too is sped up, they're only 21 and 19 at the start of the book, they've at least had more time to grow up before committing to each other. But so that's the task of young adulthood. And this is, when we talk about young adulthood, we're talking about like 19 through 39. So we're not talking about just a romantic relationship. We're also talking about the forming of your own family is in that stage, right? But you have to have a strong sense of self to be able to successfully do that, right? And not lose who you are. But then the next developmental stage is where Anne and Gilbert are, and this is middle adulthood, approximately the ages of 40 through 65. And here the task is what's called generativity versus stagnation. And generativity is the concern of guiding the next generation. How do I make my life count? How do I contribute to society and guide future generations? And while this can be explicitly about parenting, you'll note this is not generally during the age of young parenting, right?
Right.
This stage is much more about the longer range aspect of parenting. Have I guided my children enough so they become productive adults who help society? In fact, some of the central tasks of middle adulthood are about helping growing and grown children to be responsible adults, relinquishing your central control in the lives of your grown children, accepting your children's partners and friends. That's all part of the stage of development. During the intimacy versus isolation stage, that's when you get to be the center part of your children's lives, right? This is about recognizing that your children are existing in the world beyond you.
Mm-hmm. That they're part of the value system that you've generated and are putting out into the world.
Right. And they are going out and making impacts on the world, having experiences and relationships in the world outside of your control, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the stage is not solely related to parenting. Other tasks of this stage also includes things like achieving mature civic and social responsibility, developing a sense of unity with your partner if you have one, building accomplishments of yourself, of your spouse, creating and caring for community, for example. This is the stage of wanting to make sure that you are making a difference in society, leading in your community or your occupation, but also mentoring others to eventually lead themselves so that you can step back.
I think that's so interesting when you think about how this is kind of the phase of human development you and I are in.
Mm-hmm.
And like even looking back on the work we've done with this podcast in terms of sort of developing community around this show. And yeah, it's really interesting. I certainly had that experience of once I got out of my very tumultuous early career years, early marriage years, and I started to settle into like this middle adulthood year, I was like, oh no, it became very important to feel like I was giving back, that I was doing charity work, that I was part of a bigger community, that I was like creating a life I was really proud of. And I think I attributed a lot of that at the time to like, oh, well, I don't have kids, so I have time to do all this extra stuff, and that would be so great. But I also think it's like, no, this is like what we want to do. We want to feel like we are leaving the world a little better than we found it.
Right. And figuring out what our impact is and leaving something that continues on beyond us. In my career as a therapist, I spent a lot of years, my middle career years, doing what's called clinical supervision, which is supervising young therapists who aren't licensed yet in the beginning stages of their careers and helping shape them as clinicians and helping provide support for them, because that's the way of giving back to this profession, is to make sure that there are other therapists who can do this work, right? It's not just about what I'm individually doing. It's about helping develop other members of this profession to also do this, right? And you can see that this is exactly where Anne and Gilbert are in their lives. They're supporting their grown and growing children as they step forward as adults in this moment of global crisis. They're having to relinquish their central role in their children's lives. Jem, Walter, and Shirley all have to make up their own minds about whether or not they enlist. And though Walter wrestles the longest with this decision, neither Anne or Gilbert try to sway him one way or the other. They are proud of their children as full people, not just as extensions of themselves. And clearly, Anne and Gilbert have significant civic and social responsibilities between the Red Cross and the Patriotic Society. They are not just cocooned in their own little family. They're working in their community. They're leading in their community. But you can see the conflict inherent for parents of teens and young adults. Like, how much guidance is too much guidance? Are you doing what's right for them or for you? How much independence are they ready for? What kinds of mistakes should they make for themselves? And as a parent, this is a big change in identity. Parenting young children can be pretty all-encompassing. The demands are constant. It's often very physically tiring. You have to tend to the children's physical needs for safety, food, health, and it is constant decision-making. A good parent to young children is an active parent, right? You got to keep them from going off over the cliff, literally. And as they get older, you gradually are transferring responsibility from yourself to them. You are moving from actively making decisions to pulling back to supporting decisions. And this can, for some parents, they really struggle with their identity as a parent. Like if you're not in control of your kids, then are you parenting? Right? And sometimes it's just an emotional feeling. You might feel like unnecessary or superfluous or without purpose if your kids are out there making decisions without you. You have to trust that the lessons that you instilled early are sprouting on their own. Part of the reason for this is that, of course, you might be proud of the adult your child has become. You are also holding the memory of their babyhood. They don't really remember their babyhood. You do. You're seeing them as both an adult and a child at the same time. We see this so clearly for Anne as she's packing to send Jem off to training. She says, "Susan, do you remember that first day Jem lifted up his little arms to me and called me Mower? The first word he ever tried to say?" Susan does remember this, of course. And then Anne goes on, "Susan, I keep thinking today of once when he cried for me in the night. He was just a few months old. Gilbert didn't want me to go to him. He said the child was well and warm and that it would be fostering bad habits in him. But I went and took him up. I can feel that tight clinging of his little arms round my neck yet. Susan, if I hadn't gone that night, 21 years ago, and taken my baby up when he cried for me, I couldn't face tomorrow morning." That's a really powerful moment. Anne raised Jem to be an honorable man who can't help but confront injustice when he sees it. But she's also acutely aware that he was a tiny baby once and that it was her role then to comfort and protect him. Anne is working through the tension that is inherent in this stage of development in the most dramatic way possible because the stakes are so high. So there we go. There's a little human development theory for you guys.
Well, thank you, Reagan. We love getting a little peek behind the curtain of your work and expertise. And I think it's so relevant for this book, especially as we see these characters in all these different phases of life. And also so useful for all of us to think about for ourselves. Well, Reagan, do you have any inspired buys to share with us for this episode?
Yes, and I've kind of got like two different directions to go on this. So one is coming off the back of that Birch Path and coming off the back of talking about Anne and Gilbert as parents. Parenting teens can feel kind of lonely because there's lots of like discussion and support for the baby and toddler and early years, but parents of teens really still often want support and guidance. So I've got two recommendations for excellent books for parents. One is The Emotional Lives of Teenagers: Raising Connected, Capable, and Compassionate Adolescents by Lisa D'Amour. She's great. She really emphasizes building the relationship with teens and how to do that. And she gives great concrete and practical suggestions. So I really like that one. And then another parenting book I'm going to recommend, and this isn't specific to teens, it does encompass them, but it also gives you some great building blocks to start with when your kids are younger. It's called Hello, Cruel World: Science-Based Strategies for Raising Terrific Kids in Terrifying Times by Melinda Werner Moyer. She's great. She's got a wonderful parenting Substack that's called Now What, if you want to check that out. And I love the way that she is great at gathering all of these science-based strategies and being practical with what that might mean and sharing them with lots of great examples. So
that one sounds really interesting to me. I often wonder to myself how much more challenging it must be to be raising kids in these unprecedented times when it feels like, so many things are frightening and overwhelming and there's not that much we can do to help personally, and trying to set up your children to be global citizens, be responsible, be conscientious while, facing these looming issues that feel so big.
My second idea for Inspired By is because we are approaching the holiday season. If you have teens in your life and you are a last minute holiday shopper, I polled my teen and her friends for some last minute holiday gifts. These are maybe a little bit more specific to girls. Your mileage may vary. I think you could do this for either. She says that they all love super fuzzy blankets. And so if you were to get a cute, super fuzzy, like the really soft blanket, or one of those kind of like hooded wearable blankets, you would make the teen in your life very happy. Also, they're very into cute oversized sweatshirts. So the bigger, the better. And I will say the nice thing about having teens is that you can kind of think about what category of stuff you like to get. And there's probably a version of that the teen in your life will like. How about you, Cal? You got any inspired buys to share?
I will also follow your lead and do 2 inspired buys, starting with I'm going to do my foolproof holiday gift of the year for this year. This is a game. It is a party game called Wavelength. So this is not quite a board game. It's more of a party game, and it's a little bit tricky to describe, but it's hilarious. So Wavelength is like a social guessing game. You choose between 2 different ends of a spectrum. So one end of the spectrum might be hot, one might be cold, and then you have your word or concept that lies somewhere between those 2 on a spectrum, and then everybody in the group has to guess. So this works as a 2-player game, this works as a 25-person game, this works for any age group, and it's the kind of thing that really sparks fun conversations. You guys are all going to have a really, really fun time with this one. And then my other inspired buy is I'm going to recommend that if you have the extra time and funds this holiday, you should consider adopting a family. There are lots of local organizations that will do this. I think the Angel Tree is like the national level charity arm of this. We talk so much on this podcast about building community, and part of that is creating community connection across class lines, reaching out and helping people who have less than you. This is a good time of year to do that. And be sure when you are giving to these folks, in addition to all the like cute and fun toys, you're also throwing in grocery cards and gas cards and some of those practical things that they will need as well. So, well, you've made it all the way to the end. So Kindred Spirit status officially unlocked. If you loved this episode, please leave us a 5-star rating or review wherever you listen, or share about us on social media. That helps other Montgomery fans find their way to our little book club. And because you're part of our inner circle, when you send us proof that you shared, we will pop one of our gorgeous sage green Kindred Spirits book club stickers into the mail to you, along with a note of thanks from us to you. Think of them as your official KSBC crest to adorn your water bottles, laptops, or e-readers. Just email us at kindredspirits.bookclub@gmail.com to let us know that you shared the podcast. And don't forget to check out our bookshop.org link to shop for books as well.
Kindred Spirits, keep us in your podcast feeds because we will be back with another episode of Rilla of Ingleside. This one focusing on Jem Blythe and his character art in this book. We know you won't want to miss it. Thanks for listening. Bye, Kindred Spirits.
Bye, Kindred Spirits.